The morning settled heavy over Arlington, the kind of quiet that felt carved from stone. Rows of white markers stretched into the soft gray sky, and the air carried the weight of a state funeral. Retired four-star General William Ross was being laid to rest, and the road leading toward the service was lined with black sedans, polished shoes, and somber faces. At the ceremonial gate, a woman stepped forward alone. Sarah Whitfield, late 30s, in a simple black suit that had clearly been worn many times before. Her eyes were tired, her hair pulled back without fuss, her posture steady in a way that didn't draw attention yet, somehow held its own ground. Specialist Wade raised a hand to stop her. Corporal Henson followed, already wearing the half-smirk of someone convinced he understood everything before hearing a single word. They treated her like a stranger trying to slip past sacred protocol. A small line formed behind her, officers in dress blues, dignitaries in dark coats, whispering as though her presence disrupted something important. Some watched with irritation, others with quiet judgment. Sarah spoke softly, asking only to enter. She said General Ross would want her there. Wade chuckled under his breath. Henson asked where her invitation was, why she thought she belonged anywhere near this ceremony. Their voices grew louder, drowning her out until her quiet explanation was swallowed by the sting of their dismissal. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Sarah Whitfield stood at the gate with the posture of someone who had learned to carry her life quietly. Everything about her suggested simplicity. She worked long hours at a warehouse outside Alexandria, took the bus to save money, lived in a one-bedroom apartment above a hardware store, and rarely asked anything of anyone. Her life had been built on routine and silence, and most days, no one looked at her twice. She didn't mind. She had grown used to being overlooked, even comfortable with it. But today was different. Today she had come with purpose, and it showed in the stillness of her stance. Her suit told its own story. It was clean but worn, the cuffs softened by years of careful use. No medals decorated her chest. No ribbons or patches hinted at service. She didn't wear the crisp lines or polished metal that everyone around her seemed to carry effortlessly. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft, steady, but never forceful. Her hands were the only giveaway that she had lived through more than she ever spoke of. Calloused, rough-edged, the hands of someone who had lifted more weight in life than anyone realized. Officers continued arriving behind her, their uniforms perfect, pressed, and unmistakable. Dress blues glinted in the morning light, medals reflected the muted sun, and every step echoed authority. Next to them, Sarah looked like someone who had wandered into the wrong world. People glanced at her and saw nothing but ordinary. It was easy for them. It always had been. But there was one thing that didn't fit the image of an ordinary woman. Pinned to her lapel was a small piece of dark metal, misshapen and uneven, as if someone had hammered it into place by hand. Most who noticed it dismissed it instantly. It didn't shine. It didn't look official. It looked like scrap metal kept for sentiment rather than significance. But Sarah wore it with quiet care, adjusting it once with her fingertips as the line behind her shifted impatiently. Corporal Henson noticed none of this. If he did, he didn't care. He had already decided who she was, a civilian wasting their time. His voice carried over everything, sharp, irritated, and laced with the kind of confidence that came from knowing he held authority, even if only at a gate. Specialist Wade stood beside him, quieter but following Henson's tone like it was a rhythm he had memorized. Together, they treated her not as someone grieving or someone with a purpose, but as an inconvenience they were eager to remove. Sarah tried again, calmly explaining why she needed to enter, but Henson cut her off, waving a dismissive hand. Wade asked whether she had any documentation, any invitation, any reason at all to be at a funeral reserved for officials, senior officers, and close family. She answered gently, but the softness of her voice only made them lean further into disbelief. A new voice entered the conversation. Second Lieutenant Parker stepped forward from the nearby checkpoint. He was young, straight-backed, and precise in every movement. His uniform looked like it had been pressed that morning with a ruler. His eyes were sharp, not in the way of someone observant, but someone constantly policing the boundaries of protocol. "You're blocking the entrance, ma'am," he said, tone clipped. "State your authorization." Sarah kept her voice level. "I'm here for General Ross." Parker exhaled, a slow, irritated sound meant to be heard. He looked her over from head to toe, worn suit, scuffed shoes, no insignia, no family badge. To him it added up quickly, she did not belong. He questioned her again, more sharply this time, his impatience growing with every breath. She answered with the same calm she had carried since she arrived, never raising her tone, never matching his irritation. She simply repeated her truth. Her patience only frustrated him further. The line behind her grew longer. The whispers grew louder. Parker saw delay where she saw duty. He stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound threatening without causing a scene. "If you continue to interfere with this ceremony, I will have you removed. This is your final warning." Sarah's eyes remained steady, her hands folded in front of her. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. She simply stood there, as if the weight she carried was far heavier than any authority standing before her. Second Lieutenant Parker's patience snapped like a dry twig. He motioned toward Sarah's small, worn bag with a flick of his hand. "Open it. Now." When she hesitated only long enough to form a polite question, he nodded at Corporal Henson. "Search it. All of it. Right here." Henson grabbed the bag from her shoulder before she could remove it herself. He yanked the zipper open so hard the metal teeth scraped. Then he turned it upside down and dumped everything onto the gravel path, the contents scattering in a messy spill at Sarah's feet. A folded bus schedule, creased from use. A tiny, battered notebook, its spine frayed and bent. A single house key attached to no ring, just a loop of string. And a weathered photograph sealed in a small plastic sleeve. The photo slid across the gravel and came to rest near Parker's shoe. He paused, noticing it only because it stopped against his polished toe. He picked it up between two fingers, holding it like it was something fragile but beneath him. The crowd behind Sarah shifted. Even those who had dismissed her moments earlier leaned slightly forward. Parker stared at the faded image. Sarah, much younger, standing beside General William Ross. Not at a ceremony, not in a uniform. Just the two of them in an unguarded moment, both smiling faintly. Whatever the story behind it was, the picture had clearly lived a long, careful life. He turned it toward Henson. "Look at this." "You seeing what I'm seeing?" His tone wasn't curious, it was amused. Henson snorted. "That's supposed to be him?" Parker held up the picture toward the light with a smirk. General Ross didn't take souvenir shots with random civilians. "Where'd you print this? Some discount kiosk?" Sarah didn't flinch. She only said, "Please don't damage that." "It's the only copy I have." The request wasn't sharp. It wasn't emotional. It was simply true. But the quiet ache in her voice made some of the officers in line shift uncomfortably. A colonel at the back folded his arms, watching more closely now. A woman in a dark coat glanced around, as if expecting someone to intervene. Parker ignored them. He let the photo slip from his fingers. It fluttered down, landing face first in the dust. He didn't step on it, but only because he didn't care enough to. His boot hovered near it, as if daring gravity to move it another inch. "So, ma'am," he said, looking down at her like a teacher scolding a child, "are you claiming to be related to General Ross?" Sarah shook her head. "No." "Were you assigned to him? Worked with him? Served with him?" Again, softly, Number Parker laughed. A short, sharp sound that cut through the murmuring crowd. "Then, what are we doing here? You can't just wander up and claim the general wanted to see you." Sarah didn't bow her head. She didn't apologize. She simply looked at him with a steady gentleness that made his smirk falter for half a second. He recovered quickly and stepped back, sweeping his arm toward the exit road. "Corporal Henson, Specialist Wade, remove her from the gate. She's interfering with the procession." Wade stepped forward reluctantly. Henson moved with eagerness, almost relieved to have something physical to do. Together they reached for her arms. Sarah took a single step backward, not aggressive, not defensive, just firm. "I am not leaving," she said quietly. Her tone wasn't confrontational. It didn't rise in volume or waver. It was the kind of steady refusal that made more than one person in the line behind her fall silent. Wade froze. Henson hesitated. Parker's eyebrows pulled together. He hadn't expected calm defiance. Anger maybe, tears possibly, but not this. Parker's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, if you continue to disrupt a state military funeral, I will place you under arrest. Do you understand me?" The whispers behind her grew louder. A few family members had begun to gather near the path, watching with discomfort written clearly across their faces. Officers shifted uneasily, some glancing at each other, unsure how far this was about to go. The humiliation wasn't a private moment anymore. It was unfolding in front of the very people who had come to honor the man she said would want her there. At the edge of the crowd stood Captain Mason Hale. Older than Parker, broad-shouldered, posture relaxed in the way only combat veterans seemed to manage. He had seen arrogance before. He had seen fear. He had seen grief. He knew how each one shaped a person's stance, and Sarah Whitfield didn't stand like someone caught in the wrong place. He watched her feet, firm, planted, not braced to fight, but rooted like a tree that had endured storms. He watched her shoulders square, not trembling. He watched her eyes, calm, steady, untouched by panic. People humiliated by authority often crumbled. People lying often darted their eyes. People bluffing often folded under the smallest pressure. But Sarah? She stood like someone who had faced far worse than disrespect at a gate. Hale narrowed his eyes. Something wasn't right. Something wasn't adding up. There were pieces here the guards weren't seeing. While Lieutenant Parker continued his clipped lecture about military protocols, while Henson hovered too close and Wade lingered awkwardly behind him, Captain Hale felt the unease settle deeper in his gut. He didn't know who Sarah Whitfield was, but he knew one thing for certain: she wasn't standing there by mistake. Captain Mason Hale's eyes drifted back to Sarah, studying her with the patience of someone who had learned long ago to read more than words. It wasn't her posture this time that held his attention. It was the small metal pin on her lapel. In the earlier commotion, he hadn't paid it much thought, but now the morning light caught its edges. It wasn't polished. It wasn't shaped like a badge. It didn't look ceremonial at all. It looked forged, darkened by age, misshapen in a way that suggested it hadn't been crafted for show, but hammered into existence for reasons far more personal. It looked like shrapnel. His breath paused. Decorative pins didn't look like that. Military-issued awards definitely didn't look like that. He took a slow step forward, trying not to draw attention to himself, simply to get a clearer view. A piece of metal like that, worn so deliberately, rarely meant something small. Meanwhile, Parker barked another order, trying to regain control of a situation that refused to settle. "Pick it up," he snapped, pointing to the scattered items. Sarah knelt, moving with slow intention, and lifted the weathered photograph from the gravel. She didn't wipe it against her suit. She brushed the dust away with her fingertips, gentle and deliberate, as if touching something sacred. Hale watched her face as she did it. No anger, no panic. Just a quiet ache that settled behind her eyes. It wasn't the picture's state that hurt her. It was the disrespect of what it represented. That kind of reaction wasn't weakness. It was memory. A retired sergeant major standing in the crowd recognized that too. He had noticed the pin as well. His expression shifted from annoyance to confusion, then to something heavier. He frowned deeply, folding his arms, watching the scene with new attention. Whatever story that metal held, he seemed to understand it wasn't ordinary. Parker didn't notice any of this. He stepped toward Sarah, pointing at the pin now that he saw her touch it. "And what is that? Another trinket?" "Give it to me." Sarah's hand froze over the pin, her body tightening not in fear but in something far more controlled. Her eyes lifted to meet his. "Do not touch that." She said it slowly. quietly. 4 words carried on breath, yet they cut sharper than any raised voice ever could. The air around them felt thinner for a moment, like something unseen had shifted. Hale felt it instantly. His stomach tightened with a sensation he hadn't felt in years, the instinctual alertness that comes from recognizing another person who has known danger intimately. That tone wasn't defensive, it was protective. The kind a soldier used only when something mattered beyond explanation. Parker blinked, thrown off for a moment by the sudden force behind her calm voice. He looked at Hale as if seeking confirmation that he still held authority here. Hale gave him nothing. Sarah rose slowly, securing the pin between her fingers for a moment before letting her hand fall back to her side. There was something in her eyes now, something old, something tired, something that carried the weight of long-buried experience. Veterans learned to recognize each other through the quiet things, stillness under pressure, respect for the small objects that held memories, the way grief settled behind the eyes like a shadow. Sarah had all of that. Hale stepped back, pulling out his phone. He didn't break eye contact with Sarah as he dialed a number he knew by muscle memory. Colonel Marcus Reed had served beside General Ross for decades. If anyone would know whether this woman belonged, it was him. Reed answered quickly. Hale spoke low and steady. "Sir, there's a situation at the North Gate, a woman trying to enter the funeral. Says her name is Sarah Whitfield." There was silence on the other end. Not confusion, not irritation. Silence that stretched far too long to be normal. Hale's pulse slowed. Something was wrong, he continued quietly. "I don't know who she is, but she's wearing a metal pin. Looks like forged shrapnel." The silence snapped. Reed's voice cut in sharply. "Say that again." "A forged shrapnel pin, sir. Dark, irregular." She reacted when they touched it. Reed's breath caught, a sound too raw to be professional. Then, abruptly, he ended the call. No explanation. No instructions. Just a hard click, leaving Hale staring at the phone screen. Hale lowered the phone slowly. The air around the gate felt different now. Colder. He looked at Sarah again and saw the truth forming at the edges. The disrespect she'd endured wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a mistake of magnitude none of the guards yet grasped. And somewhere far above their rank, someone had just realized it. Inside the command tent, Colonel Marcus Reed moved with a speed no one had seen from him in years. His hands shook, not from age, but from the gravity of the moment. He shoved aside a stack of briefing folders, searching through a drawer of sealed envelopes General William Ross had left behind in the event of his death. Most were logistical instructions, ceremonial notes, final messages to units he'd commanded. But Reed wasn't looking for any of those. He was looking for the one Ross had mentioned privately years ago, in a voice that carried both reverence and regret. He found it at the bottom of the drawer. A small envelope, unmarked except for a handwritten line in Ross's unmistakable script. "For Marcus, only if she comes." Reed broke the seal with a trembling thumb. Inside, a single sentence sat in the center of the page, written in shaky ink. "If Sarah Whitfield ever comes to my funeral, she is to be escorted to the front. No exceptions." No questions. Reed closed his eyes for a moment and exhaled sharply, grief pushing through his chest. Ross had known. Somehow the old general had known she might appear after all these years. Reed grabbed the radio handset so quickly that the operator startled. "Patch me through to General McAllister." "Priority code." The operator hesitated. "Sir, the general's already at the reviewing stand. Now." There was something in Reed's voice that made the operator freeze. He keyed it in without another word. Static clicked, followed by a curt, steady voice. "McAllister." Reed held the note in front of him as if the general could see it through the airwaves. "Shepard 1, he said. Silence. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't irritation. It was recognition, instant, sharp, and cold. Reed continued. "She's here, sir, at the North Gate. Sarah Whitfield." More silence, deeper now. Then McAllister's voice dropped half an octave. "Halt the procession." "Sir, the procession has already begun. Halt it." In the distance, faint but unmistakable, the military band's march stuttered to a stop. The honor guard froze mid-step. The flag team paused. General Thomas McAllister had just stopped a state funeral. Reed didn't waste another second. He grabbed his coat and strode out of the tent, his urgency visible in every long step. Back at the gate, Second Lieutenant Parker reclaimed his confidence, unaware of the earthquake now rolling toward him. He puffed out his chest and began pacing in front of Sarah, reciting protocols like scripture. He listed funeral security procedures, access requirements, chain of command authority. His voice grew louder with each sentence, as if sheer volume could erase the fact that the crowd had turned against him. Officers shifted uncomfortably. A few exchanged uneasy glances. Someone whispered that this was getting out of hand. Sarah stood in the middle of it all, hands folded, eyes steady, enduring the humiliation without flinching. That bothered people even more. It made Parker's tirade look childish, petty, desperate. Captain Hale returned through the crowd, tension in every line of his posture. He stepped up beside Parker and lowered his voice. "Lieutenant, stop." "Mal," Parker turned on him. "Captain, I am conducting my duty. You may return to your position and allow me to—" Hale didn't flinch. "You need to stop talking." Parker squared his shoulders like a man clinging to the last plank of pride. "With respect, sir, I outrank her, and I am following protocol." Hale stared at him with an expression that was equal parts disbelief and pity. He opened his mouth to try again. Then the sound came, gravel crunching under heavy tires. Engines rumbling with purpose, not ceremony. 3 black Suburbans shot around the far corner like a security detail responding to an active threat. Dirt kicked up behind them. People jumped aside as they barreled toward the gate. They stopped so suddenly the suspension groaned. All 3 doors on each vehicle opened at once. Out stepped senior NCOs and colonels in full-dress uniform, men whose rows of ribbons told stories most would never hear. Their boots hit the gravel like punctuation marks. Their eyes scanned the gate with battlefield focus. The air around the entrance shifted immediately, thickening with authority. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then Colonel Reed stepped out of the lead vehicle. His face was pale with fury. He didn't speak yet. He didn't need to. The expression alone sent a chill through every guard at the checkpoint. But the true shock came next. From the second vehicle, General Thomas McAllister stepped into view. 4 silver stars. Perfect posture. A presence so commanding it seemed to reorder the space around him. He walked forward with deliberate calm, each step measured, every breath controlled. Silence rippled outward from him like a wave. Even the birds in the surrounding trees seemed to quiet. Parker stood frozen. His spine snapped straight. His hand flew instinctively toward the salute position but wavered halfway, trembling. His eyes darted between McAllister's stars and Sarah, as if suddenly understanding some part of the truth he had been blind to. Sarah didn't move. McAllister's gaze swept across the scene, hard and assessing, taking in the dumped belongings, the frightened guards, the tension hanging in the air like smoke. Then his eyes stopped on her. And everything changed. General McAllister didn't pause, didn't address Parker, didn't acknowledge the guards scrambling into stiff posture. He walked straight through them as if they were shadows cast on the gravel. Every step narrowed the space between him and the quiet woman who had endured the humiliation with more dignity than any uniform present. When he reached her, the change in him was immediate. The sternness in his jaw softened. The iron in his posture melted into something almost reverent. For a breath, he simply looked at her, really looked like he was seeing someone he had once believed gone forever. Then, in a move that pulled the air from every pair of lungs around them, General Thomas McAllister brought his hand up in a perfect, unmistakable salute. A 4-star general saluting a civilian woman in a worn suit. Gasps broke through the quiet. A captain stumbled a half-step backward. A major lowered his head instinctively, unsure if he was witnessing protocol or living history. Even the sergeant major in the crowd straightened, eyes wide. Parker's face drained to a sickly gray. His mouth opened, but no sound came. He looked from McAllister to Sarah, then back again, as if the world had tilted and left him dangling over the edge of a truth too heavy to comprehend. His hands trembled at his sides. The embarrassment he had inflicted moments ago now circled him like a silent jury. Sarah didn't return the salute. She only bowed her head slightly, her eyes soft with a grief far older than the morning ceremony. McAllister held the salute a heartbeat longer before lowering his hand slowly, almost reluctantly, as though the gesture meant more than the rank behind it. His voice came quiet at first, carrying the weight of memory. "Miss Whitfield." She looked up, meeting his eyes with a familiarity no one understood. McAllister turned then, so the entire crowd could hear him. His voice rose, not loud, but steady, filling the space with a tone that left no room for misunderstanding. "This woman is the reason General Ross lived long enough to serve this nation for 5 decades. A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. The Ross family at the back straightened, some covering their mouths. Soldiers who had stood silently moments before shifted their weight, trying to piece together the story unfolding before them. McAllister continued, stepping slightly aside so Sarah was fully visible. "Without her," he said, "there would have been no General Ross as we knew him, no decades of leadership, no lifetime of service. He lived because of a single act of courage, hers." Sarah's eyes dropped briefly, not out of shame, but out of a humility so deep it silenced even the whispering wind. McAllister faced her again, voice softening. "We owe you more than we can ever put into words." And for the first time that morning, the crowd didn't just see a woman in a worn suit. They saw the quiet reason a legend had lived long enough to become one. General McAllister didn't rush his next words. He let the silence settle first, let the weight of the moment anchor itself in the gravel under their feet. When he finally spoke again, his voice had shifted into something quieter, almost reflective, as if he were speaking not just to the crowd, but to the memory of the man they were there to bury. "There's something you all should understand," he said, turning slightly so everyone, from the officers to the family members at the back, could hear him clearly. Sarah Whitfield was not a bystander in General Ross's life. She was part of a world most of you will never read about in any official record. The murmur of shifting bodies rippled through the crowd. Even the guards froze. McAllister took a breath, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. "Years ago, before many of you were even in uniform, Sarah served as an unofficial field medic and rescue pilot with an early special reconnaissance team. No official rank. No formal title. But when missions went where maps didn't exist, she was the one they relied on." A captain near the back stiffened. A young lieutenant blinked, suddenly recognizing the pattern of strength he'd mistaken for defiance. McAllister continued, voice steady. "On one mission, deep in hostile terrain then, Captain Ross was severely wounded during an ambush. Cut off, outnumbered. No chance of extraction. No one believed he'd make it. Not even command." He paused, letting the words settle. But she went anyway. Heads turned toward Sarah in disbelief. Some of the older veterans recognized the undertone in McAllister's voice. They had heard stories like that whispered over campfires, half legend, half memory. "She reached him," McAllister said quietly, "under fire. Alone. She kept him alive through the night. She stabilized him with nothing but her hands, and what little she carried. And when the window opened, barely, she piloted a damaged bird through the dark and brought him home." Parker looked like someone had removed all the air from his lungs. Henson grabbed the nearest metal post as if needing something to keep him upright. Wade stared at the ground, face burning red with shame. McAllister lowered his voice, almost reverently now. "That pin on her lapel? That isn't jewelry. It's a piece of the mortar shrapnel pulled from Captain Ross's vest. He forged it himself and gave it to her. Called it the only medal that ever mattered." A hush rolled across the crowd. Then something remarkable happened. One soldier near the back straightened and raised his hand in salute. Another followed, then another. Soon, a wave of uniforms, officers, NCOs, enlisted, lifted their hands in a slow, respectful motion. No command was given. No order spoken. It rose naturally, like a tide pulled by a force none of them could see, but all of them felt. From afar, the Ross family watched his daughter, his grandchildren, eyes wide, hands over mouths. They had known their father as a leader, as a strategist, as a commander. They had never known the woman who had saved him before any of that became possible. Parker lowered his head completely, shame running through him like cold water. Henson's eyes glistened, though he tried to hide it. Wade pressed his lips together, shoulders tight, unable to meet Sarah's gaze. Captain Hale stepped forward quietly. He gathered Sarah's scattered belongings from the grabble, lifting each item with careful hands, brushing dust from the plastic photo sleeve before placing it gently into her worn bag. When he finished, he stood behind her silently, as if offering a quiet apology through action rather than words. Colonel Reed approached next. His face was still tense, but not with anger anymore, more with the weight of understanding. He held out her bag with both hands, presenting it the way one might present a folded flag. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His posture said enough. Sarah accepted it with a small nod, her fingers brushing the strap lightly. Then her eyes drifted past the crowd to the flag-draped coffin that had begun moving again up the slope. The procession had resumed, slow and solemn. She watched it for a long moment before speaking. "He deserved better than today," she whispered. Her voice was soft, almost swallowed by the wind, yet somehow everyone around her heard it. McAllister's expression tightened with regret. "Miss Whitfield, words cannot undo this, but I promise you, it will never happen again. Not to you, not to anyone like you." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture. His apology came from a place deeper than protocol, a place where men like Ross and McAllister learned what honor truly meant. Sarah gave him a small nod of acknowledgement. The salutes around her held steady. The silence deepened, and for the first time that morning, respect, not rank, not ritual, not ceremony, became the true center of the funeral. Sarah stood quietly as the last echo of salutes drifted away. The shame on the young guards' faces was undeniable. Wade frozen in regret, Henson struggling to breathe evenly, Parker pale and stiff as a man realizing the true weight of his mistake. McAllister stepped forward, preparing to issue consequences that would echo far beyond the morning, but Sarah lifted a hand gently, stopping him before a single order left his lips. "Don't ruin their careers," she said softly. They were following what they thought was right. Her tone wasn't forgiving out of obligation. It carried something older, wisdom shaped by the places she'd been and the losses she had lived through. McAllister paused, surprised. Few people asked mercy on behalf of those who had hurt them. Even fewer meant it. Sarah turned to Parker last. He couldn't bring himself to meet her eyes, but she waited patiently until he finally lifted his head. When their eyes met, she spoke in a calm voice that cut deeper than any reprimand. "Your uniform is not a shield, Lieutenant. It's a promise. A promise to see people, not rank, not appearance. And sometimes the greatest warriors wear no uniform at all." Parker swallowed hard. His voice cracked when he answered her. "I'm sorry, ma'am." She gave a small nod, not in dismissal, but in acceptance. A quiet gesture that carried more grace than any lecture ever could. McAllister stepped beside her then, offering his arm not out of formality but out of respect. "Miss Whitfield, if you would allow me," he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Together, they walked past the guards, past the stunned crowd, past the officers still frozen in the long shadow of revelation. As they approached the front, the Ross family rose instinctively. His daughter covered her mouth, tears forming instantly. His grandson reached for Sarah's hands without hesitation. They didn't ask who she was or why she mattered. They simply knew, through McAllister's words, through her presence, through the way the funeral had shifted around her, that she was the reason they had decades more memories with the man they loved. Sarah sat in the front row for the first time in her life, settling into a space she had never expected to occupy. When the flag-draped coffin came to rest before them, she bowed her head. Her lips trembled only once as she whispered a quiet goodbye to the man whose life she had saved so long ago in a place almost no one remembered. The narrator's voice settles here, in the stillness of that moment. Courage is not always loud. It doesn't always come wrapped in medals or uniforms or titles. Sometimes it stands quietly in a worn suit at a gate, asking for nothing but a chance to honor the past. And sometimes the world needs to be reminded that the greatest acts of service often leave no record at all, except in the lives they save and the hearts they touch. The cemetery settled back into its quiet rhythm, the kind that feels almost sacred after a moment of truth. Sarah remained in the front row long after most people had gone, letting the silence speak for everything words couldn't carry. Some heroes never ask to be seen, and some stories nearly disappear with them. But every now and then, the world pauses long enough to remember the quiet strength that shaped it. Courage isn't always worn on a uniform. Sometimes it walks beside us unnoticed, carrying the weight of memories no one else will ever know. If you felt something in this story, take a moment to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories. These stories deserve to be remembered, and your support helps keep their courage alive for generations to come.